Welcome. Our session today is part of Esade's Stay Connected platform, through which we offer various webinars covering current issues. And these webinars are available on the Esade website, Esade YouTube, and LinkedIn channels. And through these webinars, we want to share our knowledge with you and also engage in a dialogue with you. With us today is Tobias Hahn, professor at the Department of Society, Politics and Sustainability at Esade, the department that we're both in at Esade. And Tobias is deeply familiar with the topic of business sustainability, having studied it for over 2 decades. Also with us is Ryan Edwards, co-founder of Naked Innovations, and he is an entrepreneur who seeks to disrupt and innovate in the agri-food industry after many years in a corporate role at Cargill, one of the largest agri-food multinationals. And drawing on our different perspectives, corporate, entrepreneurship, retail, consumers, producers, together we'll talk about the prospect of sustainable business practices with the reopening of the economy. And we will take agri-food as an example. Why agri-food? It's an essential industry, and it may well be on a crossroads, with perspectives that show both an opportunity but also challenges for sustainable business practices. At the end of our session, we'll have a Q&A that I will moderate, and you can send us questions via the chat. The duration of the webinar will be about 30 minutes. And remember that the sessions are available on the different Esade channels. So let's get started. I would love to hear from you, Tobias and Ryan, and draw out our different perspectives. And to get us started, we want to explore what's currently happening. What is going on in the agri-food industry? How is it being impacted by the health crisis that we're seeing right now? Ryan, why don't you start us off?
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Maja. Great to be here. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think taking a step back, we were on a path just before this happened where interest in agri-food industry itself, consumers are more interested than ever, especially around sustainability, transparency of where does our food come from. People were really asking this question, and we were starting to see investment and movement towards more sustainable practices. And indeed, the question now is that going to ramp up or slow down? And I guess it's different short term, medium to long term. I think it's a really important question as well, because we'll probably see in the agri-food industry claims that it is partly responsible for this coronavirus that we're currently seeing. We've seen lots of things happening with avian flu, swine flu, and now this. And as we see intensive farming practice happening around the world, bringing us closer to food deforestation, closer to new wild animals being eaten as well, and less genetic diversity in poultry, for example. I think we're going to maybe, unfortunately, see this become a new norm. I don't want to be too extremist, but experts have been warning about this kind of coronavirus situation coming. And with the way our supply chains are designed so just in time, to be so efficient, to save as much cost as possible, it's quite susceptible to being broken. So I think it's I'm looking forward to a good debate to see the possible pros and cons that can come out of this, the new learnings, and to look at it from different sides of throughout the supply chain.
Great, thank you so much. Tobias, what's your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining. Well, I think I would like to take a consumer perspective, and I think the crisis has opened the eyes of many people, especially in the Western world, where we took so many things for granted. For instance, availability of food, of basic supplies. People did not think every time whether food is going to be available, yes or no. And now for the first time, many people see themselves in front of shelves asking themselves, well, not everything's available, not everything's there. Where does stuff come from? That's an experience that used to be only an experience of poorer people at the edge, and now it's hitting more at the center of the society. And I think this has created a new awareness of where food comes from, and maybe also where food and agri-food should be going. And I'm actually quite keen on discussing these aspects here, because there might be really a few new trends being catalyzed through this crisis.
Absolutely. I mean, what you say reminds me of a moment I had in early March when I went to my local farmers market and bought some pollen, and the lady there said, "Oh, there's so much more demand for this." So yes, we may well be seeing much more trends in terms of nutrition, health, consumer awareness. I reached out to some producers in different parts of the world, in Spain, Europe, South America and Brazil in particular, and also read a little bit up on what's happening in the US, and reached out to people in West Africa. And at the producer level, the ones who are supplying us with food, who are doing the critical part of the supply chain job in creating the products that we're consuming, their experience seems to be very, very diverse, depending on what they produce, where they produce it, what distribution channels they had. Some see almost no change. Perhaps they will ask their workers to wash their hands more often, which might be a good thing. So more hygiene on farms there. But others see either drastic increases in demand, for example, especially organic producers in the US, there's a steep increase in the demand for community shared agriculture. So where you get a basket of food every week from producers, they get so much more demand that they can't even fulfill it because they don't have enough workers to ramp up production. But others, of course, who have produced perhaps for restaurants, hotels, university services, catering services, they suddenly find themselves with this amount of production that they can't easily rechannel. And so on the televisions and the newspapers, we've seen some of these pictures of milk being dumped or products being wasted, even though that's not a uniform experience across all producers. So it seems to be very, very diverse. But yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more also on what's going on in the corporate world. How is it impacting the entrepreneurs? What's going on in the agri-food innovation scene? Ryan, can you fill us in a little bit?
I can try. Again, it's very diverse. What I have seen across the board, talking with some of the major players, including Cargill, where I used to be, and Unilever, Bunge, Alicorp in South America, these companies that were very much focused on trying to innovate. They were investing in startups, have a huge internal staff trying to support the growth of new agri-tech and food tech. Currently, let's say, pulling back some of that investment, some of those plans to increase the size of those investments, and now re-diverting their attention to survival, to managing their reputation, looking after their current employees, back to basics, as they would say. So this has been a threat to startups that are in accelerator programs who rely upon that cash for survival. We're seeing also, I've seen some restructurings happening in research and development for some of the big food companies here in Europe and also in Asia. Threat to future investments and current jobs of food scientists and researchers. As these companies decide to put their focus on supply chain, on current products, on their operations. So yes, it's not universal, but certainly there's a short-term lack of finance in the innovations, but it's also an opportunity, I would say, we talk about more later, I guess, for startups who can survive this short-term cash flow situation, because we're going, as Tobias is saying, there's a lot more interest in where does my food come from, and a lot of these startups are focused on that, on trying to make that story more transparent, and trying to show traceability. So if they can survive, there's going to be a bigger opportunity even than before for them to disrupt.
Right. Tobias, you have also been wondering a little bit about, the intersection of corporate and consumers, how they might behave. I don't know. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, what really puzzles me is okay, we now see people might be more sensitive to where their food comes from. They might ask more questions: who produced that, under what circumstances? But will this be a lasting effect, right? And will this be a lasting effect on the consumer side? Where now there have been cases in Berlin, like delivery services of organic food. They stopped accepting new customers. They reduced the delivery schedules to only every second week because they just could not cope with the demand. Will that stay, or is it just a matter of coping with the crisis, of people who just don't want to leave their houses, and as soon as everything reopens again, we will fall back to established routines, and all these services will just have served as a short-term fix, right? So I think that's a very interesting question. And on the producer side, well, if you want to put it in a negative way, in a pessimistic way, you can think of psychological insights that say that when people face a threat, a crisis, what they tend to do is to fall back on established routines, on things they control or believe to control very well, things they know very well. And I mean, innovating an entire industry system to more sustainable practices is probably not routine, right? So maybe there's a little bit of a fatigue of people now being reluctant to take yet another effort to change towards more sustainable practices, even if we well know that at least part of the problems we're facing today are inherent in our system, in our economic system, and on our way we do agri-food business. And in the long run, it would probably be better to make these changes towards more sustainable practices, because not only it might make pandemics less likely, as Ryan alluded at the beginning, but also because it might make our agri-food system more resilient, right? If we rely more on local produce, on seasonal produce, but that would require a whole shift of mindset, not only with consumers but also with the industry. And I don't know whether decision makers will be brave enough now to say, like, no, we don't fall back into our established routines. We don't want to go back to normal. We take a step forward. We take this really as an opportunity. And I think that would be a very interesting question to discuss here, and to see also Ryan's view. And Maja, you worked a lot with producers in different countries. So what makes you optimistic? What makes you pessimistic? I think that would be a really nice question to discuss.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great segue, in fact, really to discussing the opportunities, the threats, what's going on. I mean, just to fill in one more piece on what I see happening. I mean, retail, for example, in Spain is flourishing. I mean, the supermarkets see a lot more demand. Of course, people can't go to bars, can't go to restaurants. And so people stay home, they cook, they try out new things. You mentioned, Tobias, this, are people going to go back to their routines? And I think what we're currently seeing across the board is a massive disruption of habits, a massive disruption of an industry. And what will that lead to? So perhaps we should turn to the question of, okay, what are the opportunities? What are the threats? Why might this be a catalyst, or why might we see stagnation? I don't know, Ryan, again, what do you see happening in the corporate and the entrepreneurship world that makes you either optimistic or pessimistic?
I'm generally an optimist in life. So I see opportunities, but definitely threats as well. I think there's different cultures in business out there, and the ones that are innovative and really, it's not just lip surface, they really are investing in true breakthrough innovations. If they can survive this short-term crisis, medium-term crisis, they have a great opportunity, as I was saying before. So if we just look at one sector, protein sector, one of the epicenters in Canada, North America, for coronavirus or COVID-19 was in Canada, in actually a Cargill slaughterhouse, beef slaughterhouse, for the company I used to work for. Of 2,000 employees, they had 1,400 of them positively infected, unfortunately. Why is that? The conditions, they work elbow to elbow, so close together. These are migrant workers as well. I don't want to say too much more about that, but the point is that that kind of they're now having to slow down production. So you're seeing in the US or in North America, just in barbecue season, that there's a lack of meat, and you've seen Trump forcing some meat producing slaughterhouses to stay open, even though the companies want to close them. So people are very much aware now that this protein, as it is done now, meat from growth of the animal to shipping of the animal to production of the animal, right through to eating of it, is being threatened, and it's also part of the cause of what's happening. Alternative proteins, which is already a trend. We've seen Beyond Meats, Impossible Burgers go through huge investment rounds. Even traditional companies like Cargill, Tyson are investing in them. Memphis Meats, another example. Right here in Barcelona, we have Nova Meats doing some really cool stuff with 3D printed. And these companies now are able to disrupt these their plant-based proteins, and they are going to have the opportunity to replace some of the current supply chain of meat when they have the resilience that Tobias was talking about. A further disruption in 1 year, 5 years time to the meat supply chain as it is now will not hit these companies the same way, these new technologies. So you're seeing already, I think, an acceleration of a trend that was happening before, where the big meat companies were already investing in alternative proteins. They saw it themselves. I don't think that's going to disappear. I think actually is going to increase that investment, and if anything, speed up the customer acceptance, the tolerance that we have to trying out these new types of alternative proteins, as an example.
And I think I would add to that, we also see this increased scrutiny of corporate behavior, right? And the corporates know. And so Paul Polman, for example, recently published this article saying, this might be the turning point for responsible business, because businesses who treat their suppliers as partners will be in a better position. Businesses who have sound finances, who care for their reputation, they will see their future in a brighter light. So we'll go on for a few more minutes before we take any questions that you can also send through the YouTube chats and the LinkedIn comments. Tobias, what's your take? Opportunity or threat, or both?
Well, it's always both, as you know. But I mean, I'm slightly less optimistic, I'm afraid, compared to Ryan, because even if some people, or a lot of people even, might be more open to organic food, to local food, to locally produced foods, and so on, it is still, for me, questionable why people should now be more willing to accept innovative products like other sources of meat, other sources of protein, right? And another risk I see is basically, if we talk about more people buying organic, more people buying local, we talk about an affluent population, right? This has the risk of furthering divisions between different parts of the population, of those who can afford buying local, seasonal, organic. We all know it's more expensive for households, and those who can't, and who then might feel excluded and left behind, right? So I think that the opportunities will not be automatic. So we really have to make an effort to make those happen. And of course, consumers are important because they're basically, their demand is crucial. But I think it is really important what the big players are doing, right? What are the big retail suppliers, the food retailers are doing, and what are the big producers doing? And what are the strategies that niche players could play to basically create a sustained effect of this pandemic in terms of an opportunity, right? So, for instance, how can we empower local food markets to reach out to people and to keep the clientele that they have now gained, by creating ties, by maybe also new technology, by providing additional services? I think there are great examples now in people helping each other with food, with ideas, with recipes, and so on. But the challenge is really to keep that going, right? And it will not be automatic. It will require everyone's effort. And I think one key, maybe to close this remark, is basically, again, people take more of an effort if they feel a threat, if they feel threatened, as compared to see an opportunity. It's we might not like it, but that seems to be the way the human psyche works. So we'll have to join forces to make people move towards a more sustainable agri-food system, even if it requires an extra effort. And where do these extra efforts come from? Where does the motivation come from? I think that is still a challenge ahead of us.
Just to build on that, if I may, Maja.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree. Locally produced organics generally cost more. And in a strange way, I think actually this might be a chance for genetically modified organisms. So GMOs coming from the Sygentas of this world and the Bayers might see this as an opportunity with the power they have to lobby. Because right now in India, in China, and much of Africa, the government policies for GMO have been influenced by Brussels, by the EU, and they're not that receptive to it. However, it's proven that whether you like the science, whether you believe it or not, but the science shows that GMO crops do increase yields and they make crops more resilient. Now, there's been too much focus on certain GMOs that have been used more for profit making. But I think technology, as an optimist, I feel that technology it can massively help us here. And this might be the chance where these governments in the countries I mentioned, the regions I mentioned, decide finally, you know what, we can't be so selective on whether we accept GMOs or not. We have to be more open to trying them. And so maybe it doesn't go down the locally produced route to feed these people. It goes more down the even more intensive farming using these GMOs. I'm not saying I'm for or against it, but that might well be the case.
Wow, I mean, there's so many threads in what you just brought up. GMOs, technology, organics. I don't even know what to start. My take on opportunity or threat is cautious optimism. I see the industry being disrupted, and I see increased attendance of the industry to opportunities in terms of reputation, but also increased risk awareness. The industrial model has shown its weaknesses. I think the example, Ryan, that you brought from the slaughterhouse in Canada is a very illustrative one. Is it now going more towards technology or more towards local and organic? I think it doesn't have to be either or. There's opportunities and risks in both. For me, the big pathway toward a brighter future, a more sustainable future in the agri-food industry are building new relationships. And that can be new relationships between, say, ecological retail, responsible, that supermarkets that offer local, responsibly grown food. Can they retain the new consumers? Can they therefore build more mass, actually, more people who buy that, so that in the future the costs might eventually come down also and make it more accessible to all? I find there are some really interesting initiatives, very incipient at the level of producers and governments. So for example, in Colombia, I learned there are government initiatives to stop price hikes, to facilitate logistics, to give small credits to small and medium producers so they can keep up with their growing and harvesting cycles. I mean, we know that the European Union has the new Green Deal, so they might eventually tie their agricultural subsidies to, here, you get these subsidies, and we want you to foster more responsible practices. So I think there is hope. It's just important that we don't fall back into these old dichotomies of, is it health or jobs, or the environment versus the economy? And it's always, as you said, Tobias, it's always both. It's, of course, always both an opportunity and a threat. I know that there are questions coming in, and there's one question coming from LinkedIn where the person who asks says, if the consumer trend seems to me more towards local products, what's the perspective for exports? Right, food, F&B exports. Frankly, I don't know what F&B stands for.
Food and beverage, I think
Thank
that
you.
is. Yeah.
What's the perspective for exports?
Well, what I was saying before is right now, so really short term, a lot of the governments are not allowing even the exports, or the receiving company is not accepting imports for fears of coronavirus transmission. So we, as Tobias was saying, already we're starting to see less and less options in supermarkets. That's actually probably going to increase. We're right on the, I talked earlier about how we have a very much just-in-time situation in the world for our global supply chain. And those boats, those massive boats that were bringing foods all over the place that take a month to travel from Argentina into Europe, for example, they were on the seas at the time this has happened. They're now coming into port. They're being allowed to bring some of the, to bring off their products. They're now supplying us, in supermarkets. Those stocks are dwindling, and right now, the F&B exports imports is being halted in the short term. In the medium to long term, it's a great question. It's unknown. One quick example that I saw was interesting. We talk about local produce. White asparagus in Germany, which my two colleagues would know, is like gold. White asparagus is the thing you have to have in this season, it's grown in Germany, so it's locally produced, but it's actually migrant workers, normally from Romania, Bulgaria, who help grow and harvest the white asparagus. This season was just as coronavirus hit. They were not allowed to travel. There was protests as such, people maybe online protests that they wanted their white asparagus in Germany. So a number of chartered flights were put on from Romania to fly in these migrants to do the locally produced harvest of the white asparagus, and actually saw a little rise in the coronavirus cases in Germany at that time from this migrant population. So just how local is this produce? Just because it's grown in Germany, is it actually local is another question. And will we see as much migration going forward? Again, I don't know. But the food supply chain is so connected and so globalized, and we're able to eat strawberries out of season. Is that still going to be the case? And any other fruit or vegetable? Are we going to have to stick with just eating fruits and vegetables and other products in season? These are big questions that are unknown right now, but I expect to see some disruption for sure.
Right. What you said about the migrant workers, that applies, right? In California, that applies to the coffee harvest in Colombia and Peru.
Exactly.
We also need very skilled migrant workers, and they're hard to get by. So that's a very global phenomenon. You mentioned several times this just-in-time supply chain. It caught my attention that a recent letter by Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, mentioned that and put that out as we've build on these just-in-time supply chains, and they're becoming very vulnerable. And so we're starting to question this paradigm. And I think we are, again, at this point of questioning the paradigm of the current economic system, and perhaps asking ourselves more and more the question of, can we make it more resilient? And for, depending on what side you are of the exports or the inputs, that could be both an opportunity and a threat. I mean, I heard from Colombian producers who said, for us, it might actually be a good thing that there's less import into Colombia, because they can now more effectively compete. Now, of course, if you are the one who has been importing into Colombia, you are on the side of the equation where you might effectively suffer a loss. So very, very unclear, probably very diverse how the effects are going to play out. Tobias?
I mean, I want to highlight sustainability here, because, I mean, it says in the topic, is this, when we reopen the economy, is this an opportunity for more sustainable business practices? We talked a lot about the business side of business practices. Let's talk a little bit about, for the remaining time, maybe about sustainable side, because if we really take this sustainability bit seriously, then it's not just, well, more people buy tomato with organic labels in November or December, right? That's probably not what we are looking for, right? So sustainability would mean that we work towards more resilient maybe even regenerative ways of producing food, so that the production of food is more in line with natural cycles, with seasonal rhythms, not exploiting soils, not exploiting water reserves. And I think inevitably that will change not only the infrastructure, the supply chains, the industry composition, also the power within the industry, but also definitely our consumption patterns, right? People will have to be happy and accepting that eating strawberry in January is not a thing we want to do anymore, right? Even if strawberries, I mean, they're not nice in January, but they're much better in May. But still, gaining widespread acceptance for this is really key and decisive, because I mean, we can always say like climate change and bigger sustainability issues, they may have the same root causes as the corona pandemic, but in one way, hopefully we will see a vaccine for corona at some point, but we will not see a vaccine for biodiversity loss or for climate change. So the challenge ahead is a lot bigger even. And this reminds us time and again, we need massive behavioral change on many fronts.
Exactly. And the question will be, will we achieve it? Perhaps to wrap up this webinar, sort of final thoughts, brief comments on what do you see as the outlook for business sustainability in the next, say, 18 months, 1 to 2 years in the agri-food sector?
Like everything, there's going to be massive challenges in the short term for I think, unfortunately, for the innovative companies, for the startups, and certainly some of those medium-sized companies to survive. Well, especially it's going to be difficult for those that we're not talked about, those that serve primarily the hospitality, hotels, tourism industry, restaurants that we know, and bars that are going to be still closed for longer, and supply chains are set up just for that. And it's not easy to take the meat or the oils or whatever that you were selling into that sector and just redistribute it through supermarkets. It doesn't work that way right now. So there's going to be there already is a lot of struggle in that supply chain of food and beverage. I feel, though, coming back to Tobias's point, my summary there is we as human beings find it very difficult to focus on the cause, the root cause. We don't like tackling that. We typically prefer to try and rather than cure, we try to fix the symptoms. And I think what we're going to see is, in a good way, somewhat more investment in technologies like vertical farming, so that we can have our strawberries all year round. I saw a really great innovation where they're using, which can be sustainable, right? It's locally produced. So you lower the food miles and the emissions, the energy consumption. And there was a great technology about a new kind of wax sealed of vegetables and fruits that lock in that goodness in a natural way. So I think we're going to focus on curing the symptoms rather than the cause through technology, is what I expect to see more of.
Tobias, your final.
Well, I've been pessimistic so far, so let me be optimistic as well. I think it's also a great learning experience, and not least, it's a great learning experience for our younger co-citizens, like children. I mean, my kids learn so much more about sustainability and sustainability of food supplies in school before Corona crisis, and also during Corona crisis, and they will after Corona crisis. So there is, from very young ages onwards, there's a higher awareness of these questions, and they start asking these questions: where does stuff come from? And in that respect, and I see it from my own kids, Corona has been a catalyst for even more reflection on those kind of questions. So why is this missing now on the shelf? So okay, where does it come from? Is it natural to eat this right now? And it's easier for children to adapt, to understand and to question, as compared to us who are so used to all the convenience of having everything at a very low cost. So they're more willing to ask these difficult and tricky questions, and they keep on challenging us. And I think there's going to be a positive catalyst and a positive drive now, because for them it will be a period to remember.
I think that's a great way to sort of wrap this up, because, you know, it reminds me of what Dana Meadows at some point said. She's a systems thinker. She was a systems thinker. And she said, be an irritant to the mindset, you know, in asking the right questions. I think that's really how you are an irritant to the mindset. Where does this come from? How it's been produced? Is it sustainable or not? What struck me when I talked to people, I heard a lot of people who said, you know, my sustainable project has been put on hold, or I have to do my sustainability project at this corporation, but I have to do it with a reduced budget. And so I want to sort of take your comment on what are the root causes. And I remain hopeful, because I hope that in this time of crisis where everything has been disrupted, habits have been disrupted, where people ask themselves, what's really important here? What really matters? And what is perhaps the root cause? My hope is that people will take this moment to tackle the root cause, tackle the essence, and do with lesser means things that really matter, because they also know we're watching, right? We're not just going to be content with another sort of, you know, here, how great this looks, kind of marketing sustainability initiative. So I think the pathway I see forward is people starting to focus on the real root causes and turning this sector into a more sustainable one. And I think with that, we're sort of out of time. And so I want to thank you all. Thank you, the audience. Thank you for the question. And thank you, Tobias and Ryan. It's been a pleasure to be here and to do this with you. And looking forward to seeing you another time. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.